For those of you just joining us, welcome to IDC, Singtel, Trustwave and Cisco's live webcast. I'd like to introduce the speakers for today's session. First up, we have Hyun Rihazi, Vice President of IoT and Telecommunications from IDC Asia Pacific. He will be the keynote presenter and moderator for today's webcast. I would also like to welcome the panelists for today. Lee Kwang Yong, Head of SD Networks and IP Services from Singtel. Alan Phua, Director of Product Management, Asia and Japan from Trustwave, a Singtel company. And Dennis Modus, Regional Manager of SD-WAN, Asia Pacific, Japan and China from Cisco Systems. And with that, I'll hand the time over to Hyun. Hyun, please.
Thanks, Justin, and welcome everybody. It is really good to have you online with us and sharing the next hour. I'm just going to spend the next few minutes talking quickly about some of the things we're seeing that's driving the need for SD-WAN and how SD-WAN has evolved over the last couple of years. It was a new player originally, and it's now become pretty much an accepted part of the infrastructure and the strategic considerations for networking across the region. There's a fair number of players in the market and a number of solutions that can be customized to really meet your needs. But one question that we're really looking at pretty strongly is how have things changed? Obviously the last 12 months when we've been within the COVID environment has seen a dramatic change in the way that we work and engage with our customers, partners, and suppliers across the network. So that easy to understand headquarter, regional office, and branch office model has now exploded into pretty much working from anywhere that we have connectivity, from the coffee shop to the kitchen counter to the home office. We're seeing that explosion in connectivity and the expectation, unfortunately, of an enterprise class experience backed up with an enterprise class security model is sitting there and growing. We're seeing that cloud has become part of the accepted vernacular of most organizations. Across the whole region, most organizations are using 2 to 4 cloud providers, and some are claiming 5 to 7 different cloud providers. And when you start looking at SaaS solutions and collaboration solutions and office solutions and video management, as well as the more traditional DevOps type environments, that number of cloud-based endpoints that come into the enterprise is growing even faster, right? But it's not just people. We're estimating that IoT is going to continue to place demands on the network. We are looking at about an 18% growth over the period from 2019 to 2024 and growing to about 12 billion devices in Asia Pacific alone by 2024. And when you think that today we only have about 3.5 billion cellular connections worldwide, we're looking at a 4 times growth in the number of non-person connections in that next couple of years. And then, supporting the remote office and adapting to the new environment that's been brought on us by COVID is requiring us to change our infrastructure yet again. As we've gone through a centralization process, a move to cloud process in whole or in part, and now we're going to a remote working model. So all those things are driving us. The things that are impacting the distributed organization and the topics we're going to discuss in the panel in greater detail is the traditional network architecture has some limited flexibility and agility. We're doing the best we can to deliver enterprise class experience, but as we move out to these heavily distributed environments, we have to deal with the capabilities that are available to us on fiber networks, old copper networks and cellular networks. So network management and management of capacity and adapting flows to support workloads are becoming bigger and bigger issues. Secondly, we want to have the best application performance we can. So as we depend upon more and more of these kind of interactions, we're on average, people are now dealing with 6 to 10 conference calls per day. Uh, we have to ensure that application performance is managed and can also be delivered in the context of the fact that people may be at home and there may be competing workloads from entertainment for streaming, gaming, education, and other solutions beyond just the set of stuff that we're giving people from the enterprise. And then security. It's relatively straightforward to secure the environment in a central and branch model to ensure that content doesn't get mishandled, that it doesn't get exposed to networks that are not as secure as they could be. But when we go to this distributed model, we have to ensure that we can apply the right levels of security to the right people, to the right pieces of content, and in the right context, so that we don't compromise the information that's available in the enterprise. So I mentioned at the beginning that SD-WAN is really becoming part of the landscape of our networking strategy, and 56% of enterprises have agreed with us that they are either in deployment already or are about to deploy this year SD-WAN solutions, right? So there's a significant number of folks who are out there who have taken the first step to adopt and embrace virtual networking. The thing they're now coming to understand more apparently is that security has to become cohesive and consistent across all of our connectivity models. As I mentioned, whether it's a private network or a public network. So delivering that policy-based and identity-based security, ensuring that workloads are protected or restricted, depending on what we want to do to deliver that in optimal operational efficiency, while also maintaining cost. Because we don't want to put in a private MPLS line to everybody's house. It just wouldn't be practical. So at the same time, we have to deliver capability and security across the network within the constraints of that reality that we live in right now. So we really want to look to a situation where this year and going into next year, we're starting to move from those SD-WAN solutions which supported pop-up environments or limited use cases to a much more cohesive virtual networking strategy where the network and the security capabilities walk hand in hand to support the workloads, the applications, and the deployment models. And as we move from a DIY type architecture for SD-WAN through to a co-managed or fully managed service, that we maintain the right level of performance and capability across everything that we're doing. So a couple of key things that have come out of our research that we are offering as some guidance here. Making sure that your service provider or your technology partner in the delivery of SD-WAN is talking about how the support for multi-cloud environments, for distributed work models, for multiple protocol technologies, and for an integration of security into their roadmap is going to be really important. Obviously, making sure that the service provider and their partner network can cover the environment that you want to cover for your organization, so that wherever your people are, wherever your customers are, wherever your partners are, they've got the connectivity they need. And then regularly push the boundaries on the security implementation and the maturity of that security so that the solutions you've put in place are keeping up with the evolution of your workloads and your working models. And then finally, look at the track record. It's going to make sense. Make sure you've got the right partner to take you forward through this whole transformation process. So, a couple of key points there. Just remind you at this point, if you have questions as we go along, to bring those questions into the Q&A area, pose them. We'll try to get to as many of them, as Justin said, as we can, but we will try to keep a robust discussion. And if something occurs to you, put a question in there, and we'll get through to it. So now I'd like to bring my three esteemed experts. Lee Kwan from Singtel, who's running the SD Networks and IP Services function. Alan, also from Trustwave, who's leading the product management for Asia Pacific and Japan. And Danny from Cisco, who's looking after the SD-WAN product family. We'll get them online, and we'll start with just a very broad question for each of you. Given everything that's happened in the last 12 to 18 months, COVID and everything else, how are you seeing your customers' infrastructure needs evolving, and is the technology keeping up with it, and what are the problems that they're facing? If we could start with you, Lee Kwan.
Sure, thanks, Hugh. I think we've seen a lot of changes in the past year, especially for our customers. We also noted that in a recent IT strategy survey by IDC in July last year, because of the pandemic, customers have changed the way how they want to design, consume their IT resources. They're moving to cloud more aggressively, to digitalize. They're also looking at how do they better support remote workforce, and also looking at how security, networks, cloud can all converge into a single portfolio of services. So on our end, we also see our enterprise customers implementing hybrid networking, looking at MPLS, moving to a combination of MPLS and internet for obvious reasons of cost savings, digitalizing to the cloud, and because a lot of their applications are also on the cloud now. And because of the pandemic, the use of video and collaboration IT tools are also pushing customers to offload their traffic to internet, and that increases the bandwidth a lot. So comes SD technologies, which enables that, but also accelerates that to some extent, providing customers with the visibility and traffic prioritization of their bandwidth applications. Management complexity will also reduce with central management of SD-WAN and SDN services. And I mentioned earlier on the bandwidth, SDN actually will help customers to flex their bandwidth, what we call network on demand, so that they can change their workloads, applications on the fly. So that's how we see it on the telco side of things.
Cool. Danny, I'd like to go to you next, if I may. Obviously Cisco's been a big player in delivering virtual networks. How have you seen the adoption and the change in utilization, I guess, over the last couple of years?
Well, it's been more interesting in the last couple of months, to be frank, right? The years were what I would call a normal transition. The last 6 to 9 months have been really interesting, and Kwai Yong just referred to it, right? What we see is a distribution of the workloads much more rapidly because there was a demand for more flexibility, more scalability. So what we've seen is customers, and I think you mentioned it as well, move not only workloads into a cloud, but in multiple clouds, bringing more complexity, bringing more challenges. So that is definitely one area that we've seen. The second one is what I would like to call the hybrid workforce. We've definitely seen some of the things that were just mentioned, but we're also preparing for what that new normal looks like. And if you look at the example here in Singapore, where there's very big multinationals canceling, office space in central business district, simply because they no longer expect to go back to these, quite frankly, honest, expensive places to rent. We're going back to a model that we maybe had 10, 15 years ago, where we have more regional offices spread all over the island. And so what you're going to get is a worker could be at home Monday and Friday because that's convenient, go into a satellite office on Tuesday and Thursday, and go to the main office on Wednesday. Yet having the same expectation in terms of quality delivery, the same expectation from a corporate perspective around security in all of these locations. So that's definitely something that we've seen emerge in the past couple, I'd say 6 to 9 months.
Another interesting point of that is that, we're starting to see a thing here in Australia where people are fleeing the cities. Now, it's not a massive migration at the moment, but people are starting to take a decision to move a little bit further out. The real estate market is incredibly hot. A lot of people are renovating, and so we're seeing that expansion is going even more to a situation where people are moving further and further away and being less engaged with that central office. So, Alan, given all this, this expansion of the number of locations where we've got people and workloads, what does that do to our security posture, and how do we sort of support that collaborative environment while still delivering a good security experience? Did we lose Alan? Did we lose me?
I think we did, because his screen seems to be frozen.
I think he is frozen. Okay, we're going to come back to Alan. Good. All right. We'll come back to that. And while we're waiting for Alan to rejoin us, Lee Kwan, I'd like to come back to this and say, how have you seen the landscape for connectivity changing across your customers? Is it the same and just add a little bit of extra stuff, or are people really rethinking the way they build these environments? Kwang Yong, I'm sorry.
Hi. I think it's a bit of both. We're seeing both sides of customers. There's a group of customers who are enhancing the architecture due to all the legacy applications. They couldn't evolve or transform immediately. There are customers who take a more drastic approach. But what have changed are also in this their expectations of how they want to work and consume services on their network and service providers. So, for example, they expect service providers now to be able to support their digital journey with more agility. Other than just lowering costs, they're looking at how can we provide customers with more flexible contract terms. With the pandemic, everything is changing. You can't expect them to keep on the same infrastructure day in, day out. So they're looking for flexible terms and how service providers can support their changing needs. And they're looking for more business-driven outcomes, more SLAs type of KPIs for service providers. And that's because they have to adopt to many different changes. They have to adopt to remote working practices that have changed. The IT teams are now swarmed with how do they transform their networking applications into hybrid clouds. And technology to us is now a means to customer centricity in our view. It is no longer a platform. It is a means to help customers achieve their business-driven outcomes. Maybe I elaborate a bit further. In terms of managed services, how they expect customers, enterprises, the way they look at managed services have changed. They are looking at service providers to look at how do they react faster. How is there a way to provision services faster with SD technologies? How do they allow co-management now that they want a bigger say because of the way they need to move faster? They're looking at how to work with service providers to co-manage their networks compared to the past where they are fully outsourced. And they're looking for us service providers to provide innovative value models, pricing models to help them cope with their changes without locking them down into contracts with hefty penalties. And last but not least, of course, they are looking at how do we enable cloud-centric and multi-cloud management capabilities.
Yeah. Kwang Yong, thank you for that. Alan, looks like you are back online with us.
So sorry.
No problem. With all this,
that's why the whole screen freeze.
that's right. The real life delivery of dynamic network environments. How do we enable all of these different demands as we expand the levels of digital collaboration, and we look to provide these seamless experiences without compromising the security of data, identity, all those sorts of good things across the newly distributed enterprise?
I think we need to start off, I would say agreeing that the threat vectors has changed. The change of threat vector, or the notion of trust has actually really changed from centralized, where we have actually all the assets, our crown jewels within our data center, within actually the office environment, within actually the boundary, to actually a distributed setup, a regional setup, or actually even, at an end user laptop, which is actually working from home. What we are seeing from data is that the attacks on end users and all these remote setups has actually grown, especially in the last few months. We have more DNS redirection attacks. We have actually more direct attacks on endpoints, etc., targeting the data that is actually on the end user setup. But if you take a step back, you will realize that most of our customers today, this is actually really from the customers, that the network team, the application workload team, the security team, all these are actually different teams. And how do we actually get all these different teams to come together and actually work together? And even within, I would use the word Singtel environment. Myself and Kwang Yong, we're actually really getting our teams to work together so that we can actually provide a comprehensive, secure, managed SD-WAN solution out there. And the ironic part is that when you look at network and security, a lot of time, it is just, it doesn't gel together, because network management is very different from security management, where I have actually people 24/7 looking at actually alerts, streams, data streams coming in before they can actually analyze what is actually happening. So companies must come together, different teams, and actually really coming from the perspective of zero trust. That means that, building security, by design into actually whatever we do. That is actually really something very key in this new norm that we are talking about. That's something that what our customers are asking us to do. That is actually what the customers are expecting, even at the connectivity layer at SD-WAN level, which is probably owned by telcos at this moment. Yeah.
So, do you see that the network model, where we're looking for these multiple locations across multiple protocols, across multiple networks, delivering to multiple cloud environments, do you think that there is a continuing need for security and network to come together, and how does that impact what our audience is doing on a day-to-day basis? What should they change to make this an easier process, if you like?
I will relate this back to actually one of the questions that I seen from one of the audience as well. Collective restriction versus actually restricted collaboration. Basically, it's should we actually give security controls to actually our end user? How much do we give? In a certain way. So security is actually really never about one single control panel or actually plane that buying one set of security setups or actually controls, you can actually be secure 100%. That doesn't work that way. So when we look at actually security from I would say onion approach, right, multi-layers and things like that, we start from data, endpoints, apps, network, and what we are looking at now is actually really the connectivity layers. By actually having all these multi-layer security setup, in place, we can actually, really enhance the overall posture of security within our enterprise customers. And by actually having these multi-layers, right, there will be situations and areas that you'll be giving controls back to the end users. So yes, there will be I would say, an increase of actually responsibility on the end users to ensure they have they are empowered to actually provide, to actually enforce and ensure security on their own individual assets. But at the same time, enterprise are not giving that up totally. They are actually, creating additional layers to ensure that even at the labs of actually end users, they still have actually multiple layers of security behind the scene to actually enhance and actually to protect all these, I would say, overlooks from actually all the end users. But it is actually really about multi-layer security here. But yes, users are having controls over what they can do. They can, they can actually expect it as
well. I'd like to get Danny and Kwang Yong to chime in on this. And the perspective I'm looking for is, how have you seen the way that enterprises are supporting their organizations, their networking and security models? And has that changed as a result of the introduction of SDN into the overall mix? Either one, Kwang Yong.
Sure. I think there's two parts to this. To this question, I think what's often overlooked is what we call the underlay on the underlying carriage. That is no longer the sexy part of the networks, but it's very key. So if you imagine what happens if you choose the wrong partner or service provider, your network's connectivity quality will suffer. And that's why I meant it's always overlooked. And as customers move from MPLS to internet or hybrid environment, it is often very key. It's about choosing the right partner that gives you the visibility into what's happening to your connectivity. So that's why we work with partners to look at how do we provide customers their visibility from site to cloud, site to their DC. Giving customers the transparency is very important to be able to let them decide how do they design their network. And what I meant by that is, if your underlay is not designed properly, the latency of the applications will affect the performance of the network. To make sure you know how fast the application needs to reach the cloud is important. And that's why customers are also, in a way, redesigning some of the ways they break out into the cloud. A couple of years ago, we've seen customers break out from a central hub back to different clouds. And recently, we've seen the trend moving from a central design to more distributed designs. So, for example, MNCs that we were supporting to redesign their breakouts into different locations, regional HQ, so that their own end users can reach the cloud faster in a more distributed manner. And that provides different types of complexity, including security design, including hardware, including cost. You got to study how different applications react and different clouds. And more importantly, is the security, which maybe I can invite Alan to talk more on a deal that we work on jointly to help customers distribute their clouds, but also take care of their security. Alan.
You're on mute.
Yep, sorry, I was actually on mute. So you hear that very, very often in the last few months. Yep. So adding on to what I would say Kwang Yong actually spoke about is we came into that deal with, for that I would say the UK MMC, or actually EMEA MMC itself, to really help them I would say secure whatever we can manage, and actually also manage whatever we can see. So I mean, to start off with, right, how many of actually our customers have visibility into SD-WAN? I would say actually not many, because those are actually really at the telco level. So what we actually coming in for that particular customer is actually using whatever we can see. We build in the management capability to manage all these things that we can see. And on top of management, we actually build in security monitoring and response. Because I like to actually always use this statement: you can't actually secure what you can't manage. You can't manage what you can't see. So the first thing, for everything that we talk about is actually really, do you have the visibility into actually whatever you want to protect? So yeah, that is actually what the customer is actually looking for, to enhance or to add additional layer security to whatever they have, even at the connective layer. But first thing, they have challenges to do that because they can't actually get access to the connectivity layer, which I think I came together with Kwan Yong. We sat down, we derived actually, I would say the end-to-end process that with actually whatever network can see on the SD-WAN, I will be able to actually enforce and actually implement security controls on it, and actually really bring it back also to the customer. That is actually something that, well, I would say not a lot of telcos can actually work with players out there. We have a very unique relationship. That's why we actually managed to make it. Yeah.
So what you're mentioning a bit of a customer example there. What sort of results have you seen from the customers who are, able to make these changes in their network and security posture? What sort of benefit have they achieved? Benefits, in your experience thus far?
So let me start off with, because this customer that we talk about, right, has easily I would say 50 over offices across the world, or actually more than that. So what we're actually providing them is actually really one single panel view of both network and actually security here. That while they are actually really calling one help desk if they have actually any challenges on network connectivity and things like that. The same help desk will be actually also the guys that will be helping them on the security front. Because for that same customers, I'm actually extending security monitoring controls into the environment, into the enterprise environment, monitoring the endpoints, security posture, monitoring the network security posture within the LAN. And when you put all of this information together, right, you have a very comprehensive view of security posture, not just in one region, but actually globally around the world for this particular customer. So that is actually really the power when you have actually multiple teams, from application, from workload, from network, coming together to actually really form that single pane of glass from a security monitoring and actually management point of view. Yeah, it's kind of beautiful when you see the whole thing together. Yeah.
Yeah, because that has significant implications for performance and capacity planning over time, and also for planning demands on growth and extension of those networks, to be able to actually see it all in one place, and move beyond the Excel spreadsheets and the manual diagrams. Danny, are you back with us? I can see you there, but I can't see your face.
I am, and I'm in one of these dynamic situations where you work from home and your neighbor decides to do some renovation work. That's what happens. So I apologize. I can no longer be on webcam.
That's fine. But I would like to come back to an earlier question around how you'd seen from Cisco's standpoint, because you do both SD-WAN and security products. How have you seen the landscape change as a result of this move towards virtual networks? And is it something that you see accelerating over the next couple of years?
It has to accelerate, right? Because that world, whether we as a vendor, Cisco, or even Singtel as a partner likes it or not, it is converging, right? We cannot deny that. I would say, again, the past year or so has absolutely seen an acceleration in that, and I will continue to see it accelerate. Now, if we take it back to our customers, I think there will have to be a convergence there as well, right? Past are the days where you could say, here's a network, and now you security, you have to protect it, or vice versa. So what we're seeing is these cross-functional work groups that are looking at, what are the business outcomes that we need to deliver, and what is the technology that we need in order to deliver that. And I would say one caution I would make is really start applying that into your methodologies if you do not do so already, because you will notice, what we've noticed at least, is that customers tend to rush into this, buy something that is, at first glance good enough, to then realize during deployment that good enough isn't good enough, and then they end up having to buy additional point solutions to complement some of the gaps that they may have overlooked, and the result becomes, another hodgepodge spaghetti of multiple vendors, multiple technologies, And then to some of the topics that we discussed earlier, right? This entire identity-driven approach of quality of experience and security goes right down the drain when you have that spaghetti of vendors, right? So that's definitely something to keep in the backs of your minds when you're going on what I always call the journey.
Well, and that brings me back to another interesting thing that we're seeing in terms of the growth of non-human endpoints in the enterprise traffic mix, if you like. The increased number of video cameras and sensors and, all that sort of componentry. Does that change things? Does it change the planning that enterprises need to do, or is it just, more of the same?
I assume that's still a question for me, Hugh. It's a little bit of both, right? So, for instance, in Australia, we've got one of the meteorology companies that is now putting all of their sensors across across Australia onto an SD-WAN network. So the amount of devices that get connected vastly surpasses the amount of traditional devices, as in laptops, switches, routers, right? By a factor of 10. In terms of traffic, it's a factor of 5. So in a sense, yes, you need to cater for it. But the way we approach it, it's just a segment of our SD-WAN fabric. And therefore, there's no risks nor interference with the quality with the rest of the corporate network. But it does require some planning. But in terms of deployment, look, SD-WAN was built for deployments at scale with zero-touch provisioning. And IoT is just a use case on top of many others.
Kong Yong, I'm interested, obviously you work very closely with enterprises in implementing these sorts of solutions. Is it that simple, or is there more to it?
There's definitely more to it. And we're also pretty excited by emerging trends of 5G, IoT, like what you mentioned. What's important for customers is how do they bring those traffic and IoT or the sensors as fast as possible to the clouds where the applications are. Right? How do they process the data? How do they crunch the data and render it properly? So that gives us different pain points or challenges. One is where do we bridge those traffic to the cloud? There's a couple of thoughts around it in the industry. One is via the SD-WAN gateway, but that will mean enhancing the SD-WAN gateways to be IoT ready so that we can render those IoT traffic and data into something that's recognizable to the clouds where the applications are hosted. That's something we are looking at, and we probably announce something by end of the year on these capabilities. It's also about prioritizing the traffic and applications across different areas into where they want to be. And the third piece is what we are also working on, which is the network will also have to evolve to take in those traffic. Other than bursty, customers are also looking at ways of how do they consume such traffic. It may no longer be willing to pay us fixed contract term or monthly term. And that's where what we call network as a service come into play, whereby you allow customers to flex their bandwidth or even charge them according to the bandwidth they use. Very different models, and that brings me back to my earlier points. And that's where service providers ourselves have to support our enterprises and customers in their use case so that it's more business driven. And that's where I see the key role service providers will play to evolve their network differently to support such use cases.
Yeah. Alan, I've got to come back to you and ask you the inevitable zero trust question, because we bring, as Danny was saying, 5 times, 10 times, 100 times the number of connections of traditional versus IoT, and yet we can't trust those endpoints because they are isolated. And I just saw the latest news story where somebody broke into the network of a casino through the fish tank. They had a smart sensor on the fish tank. How do we protect all these things, and how do we keep being able to move forward with these use cases that we want to employ without compromising our security situation? or do we just accept it as part of the fabric of the landscape?
I think zero trust, by design, is actually really not to trust anybody, anyone at any levels, itself. And what we are seeing, right, from the customers, how do they actually really approach, these new threat vectors or this new horizon? I'll call it. It's actually really, a big uptick of micro-segmentation and actually really moving, security, to even the cloud platforms, talking about even security configuration controls, assessment, and continuous assessment, and actually cloud platform monitoring, etc. So these are actually what we are seeing as our customers, goes along this digital transformation journey. And what we are seeing, like what you mentioned, when all these small endpoints, unmonitored endpoints is actually popping up, everywhere around within the organization. By having actually the right, setup, design, I would say, with, this fantastic, I would say, new elastic model of actually micro-segmentation, they are able to actually really zoom down all the way to actually individual endpoints or even workloads, to control and actually allow and disallow what they can do, actually who they can talk to, etc. So this is actually what a lot of customers are doing today, what we are seeing. And when you take a step back, it's actually really, these are actually all sitting on cloud platforms. So the ability to monitor and actually really provide security control, security management assessment in the cloud is very key. And we are seeing a lot of customers moving towards that. But moving the cloud is easy. I think the next question is, how do we secure cloud? Yeah, and which is a very big word. Cloud security to me is like when customers come to me, I need to secure my cloud. My next question is, so what is cloud to you? What do you understand by cloud? Before let's talk about security. But first, let me understand what do you mean by that question? Because it is so huge. The boundary is indefinite if you are talking about cloud application versus actually a cloud boundary, cloud platform, etc. So it is a very interesting new word. But a lot of us are looking at actually how do we actually extend that network security to cloud security at this moment as well.
Yeah. I think, through this conversation thus far, we've sort of, there's that first stage of identify all the things that are out there. That's the first one. Bring them into that single pane of glass. The second is categorize them according to their importance and workload. And then the third one is secure them so that they have the right freedom to move while not compromising the overall integrity of the enterprise and the environment. So, moving through those three steps. Danny, I was curious to come back to you and say, as we bring on more and more devices are coming from more and more locations, and we have, sort of some hesitancy about the origin of some of those solutions that are coming into the network. What's the role of orchestration and automation in sort of making all this work? And where are we going from a capability standpoint in delivering that?
So first of all, the way that SD-WAN is built uses the same zero trust model, right? So not just any appliance can connect to that SD-WAN fabric. It needs to be known upfront before it can even connect there. Where we're going from orchestration, obviously, when we get to the point that I mentioned earlier, zero-touch provisioning, it's become quite a bit more straightforward to actually just deploy appliances and make it a logistical process, as opposed to what it used to be, where we had to dispatch an engineer, get somebody to go on site, fiddle around a little bit in CLI to then bring it live. So that is now really behind us. I can say that Cisco's SD-WAN is true zero touch, right? It's plug and play. You don't have to copy some serial over from somewhere else and then plug it into a screen and connect to a Wi-Fi, and then it becomes zero touch. It truly is, right? You plug it and off it goes. And I think that's important. It's important, again, for two use cases that we see primarily across this part of the world. It's in a retail context, right? Where you typically do not have I'll say it, IT skilled individuals in that location, right? So you're perfectly fine asking a store manager or somebody that's there, hey, you're going to receive a box. through UPS, DHL, FedEx, whomever it may be, SingPost, and you need to plug in this cable and that cable, and you're done. The other use case is more from an industrial perspective. Same thing, right? You cannot expect there to be a trained IT engineer to go attach these things. And so definitely that's an area where it helps from an orchestration automation perspective. As soon as a device calls home, it will get its profile, it will get its security posture. All of that happens automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We have about 5-10 minutes left. And to the audience, we would love to address some of your questions. If you have them, please put them into the panel in front of you. We will see them and we will try and get to them. So keep those questions coming, and we'll address those as we go into the last 5 or 10 minutes of the session. Kwan Yong, I'd like to come back to you real quick and say, is there any particular group that you're seeing from an industrial standpoint or a company size who are really embracing SD-WAN and delivering real, strong results out of it? Or is it only for the top end of town, for the big guys who have those IT shops and, all the capabilities to make all this work together?
We're definitely seeing the trend of the bigger guys having regional offices around the world leading the way. They have more stringent and more complex requirements that SD-WAN can contribute more towards solving their issues and management. For example, it would mean that they wanted to have, we have one customers who wanted to look at how their applications are performing across different regions. And they wanted us to customize the SD-WAN solution such that we can trigger them alerts when the applications reach certain latency or where there's congestion and packet loss. So that's definitely one top end of the complex case. But even in Singapore, we are seeing enterprises embracing SD-WAN in their own light. The smaller enterprises are looking at SD-WAN to simplify their network management as IT resources get constrained and limited. And we see even the local enterprises looking at hybrid technology. They will go on MPLS. They are adding on an internet line to help them manage costs, moving the non-critical traffic to the internet side of things and keeping their MPLS for their critical applications, for example, POS, financials, reporting. So that's pretty interesting for us, and that brings us to a different way of how do we engage our customers differently. It's no longer one solution for all, and that's why we will have to cater different complex suite of solutions for MNCs down to the more basic level. For example, Meraki would be a good fit for those smaller enterprises that we work with. They really like the simple plug-and-play integrated dashboard that he mentioned. So those are the trends that we are seeing evolving in different lights of the SD-WAN industry.
Okay. To sort of bring us home on this topic, could I ask each of you to suggest 3 key things to remember for our audience as they go back to dealing with their existing networks? And I'd like to start with Danny, go to Alan, and finish off with Kwan Yong if we can.
Sure. Thanks for that, Hugh. I'll refer to a previous answer, right? So it is perfectly normal for SD-WAN and that convergence of networking and security to be a journey, right? So do not expect that this is something you will be doing overnight, especially with that adoption of cloud, multi-cloud coming into that. That's a lot of complexity to deal with, A. B, that's a lot of risk to deal with from a security perspective and those threat vectors that have been mentioned by Alan, B. But C, it's an architectural change. And it's not just some technology refresh, right? So accept the fact that it's a journey, focus on what are the business outcomes you need to get to, and really focus on what does that journey then look like for you as a customer, and what are the different milestones along that journey, because like I said, it's not an overnight thing. The third thing I would say is do not rush into good enough, right? Really home in on what are those critical business outcomes you want. Don't look at just the next 3-6 months, buy some technology, then realize you need to buy some more and some more and some more. Go for the longer term. Keep in mind it's an architectural change. Break it down in different milestones. Analyze the different vendors that are out there and find the one that is best suited for you.
Yeah, get a plan. I agree, 100%. Alan, 3 things from you.
Yep. Yeah, this is okay. Let me try this. So I'll say that if I were to actually have 3 things that I want the audience to take back, is actually really start off with having the visibility to whatever that is actually you have in your organization. Extending to cloud, to actually infrastructure, etc. Knowing what you have, and after that, having the ability to manage them. Whatever that you have, you may have actually a printer sitting somewhere that you may not even know of, etc. And top that up, I'll end that up with actually really security monitoring and management. Because like what I actually use this phrase a lot. You can't actually secure what you can manage. You can't manage what you can't see. So make sure that you know what you have. That is actually very key, especially when we branch out to cloud. It is a whole new world out there. There's a lot of things that goes there that you will never know. Yeah.
Works for me. Kwan Yong.
I would say firstly will be, don't underestimate the importance of the underlay, which is your connectivity, because that implicates a lot of design as you flow up the upper stack of things. Choose a provider, then make sure they can give you the visibility onto what you are moving towards, rather than just cost. And the other piece is about SD-WAN. There are many solutions out there pitching different strategies. So I think enterprises should be aware how they position themselves, and also what do they need to be able to choose the right SD-WAN solutions. And even for ourselves, we see customers engaging different solutions, and we have really looked down onto what do we really need. Is it a WAN optimization? Is it to the cloud acceleration? Or is it just central management of the endpoints and devices? And last but not least, I'll echo what Danny has mentioned, is about the longer-term business-driven objectives. That is very key to know what you are moving towards. And that will influence a lot how you design your network, or whether you go single or multi-cloud, and that indicates what solutions you choose later on in your IT transformation. Thanks.
Oh, perfect. So to paraphrase the esteemed panel, I think, get a plan, really important. Understand what it is you're dealing with and the value of those things. I personally have heard of situations where, companies have actually put SD-WAN in place and discovered applications and endpoints that they never really expected to find in their environment. And, challenge the solution that you put in place, right? So, really keep, as you take that first step, challenge your assumptions, challenge your architecture, challenge the security, make sure that it's all still meeting your needs and that you are getting what you want out of the whole solution to make it all work effectively. I would like to thank the panel, Kwan Yong, Danny, and Alan, for not only discussing the new world of how hyper-distributed enterprises and virtual networks, but also demonstrating some of the challenges we live with on a day-by-day basis. And I'd like to, at this point, thank the audience.